The year is 1550 before the Common Era. Along the fertile banks of the Nile, beneath an endless azure sky, a civilization stands at the threshold of its greatest age. The foreign invaders known as the Hyksos have been driven from the delta, and Egypt has emerged into a period of unprecedented power and splendor. This is the dawn of the New Kingdom, an era that will endure for nearly 5 centuries and witness the transformation of Egypt into an empire stretching from Nubia to Syria and the Valley of the Kings. Beneath a pyramid-shaped mountain called Tardehent, workers descend into limestone cliffs with copper chisels and oil lamps, carving passages deep into the earth, eternal homes for the god-kings. On the eastern bank at Thebes, the greatest religious complex the ancient world will ever know rises stone by stone as successive pharaohs pour the wealth of empire into monuments proclaiming the glory of Amun-Re. This is ancient Egypt at its zenith. This is the New Kingdom. The reunification of Egypt under Ahmose I in the 16th century before the Common Era marks the beginning of the 18th dynasty. For over a century, the Hyksos had controlled Lower Egypt from their capital at Avaris in the delta, fracturing the ancient kingdom and dividing it from the Theban rulers who maintained power in Upper Egypt. The lords of Thebes never accepted this division. Generation after generation, they strengthened their armies, adopted the weapons of their enemies, the composite bow, the horse-drawn chariot, the curved bronze sword, and prepared for the moment to strike. That moment came when Ahmose I assembled his forces and launched the campaign that would change Egypt forever. When Avaris fell around 1540 before the Common Era, Egypt was unified once more. Ahmose pursued the fleeing Hyksos into Canaan, then turned south to subjugate the kingdom of Kush in Nubia, extending Egyptian power to the farthest reaches of the Nile. The trauma of foreign domination had taught Egypt a harsh lesson. Never again would the two lands allow themselves to be vulnerable to invasion. The pharaohs of the New Kingdom would transform Egypt from an isolated civilization into an aggressive military power, creating buffer zones and vassal states to protect the heartland. The age of empire was beginning. Thebes, known to its inhabitants as Wayset, becomes the beating heart of this new Egypt. Located 800 kilometers south of the Mediterranean, the city sprawls across both banks of the Nile, a metropolis of perhaps 50,000 souls during its peak in the 15th century before the Common Era. The eastern bank is a living city of mud-brick houses, palm-shaded gardens, and monumental temples. The western bank belongs to the dead. In the pre-dawn darkness, the streets come alive. Bakers kindle their ovens, filling narrow lanes with the aroma of fresh bread. Fishermen push their papyrus skiffs into the river's gentle current. Farmers lead cattle toward fields made fertile by the annual inundation, that miraculous flooding depositing black silt across the valley floor. The city rises in tiers of society as clearly defined as temple steps. At the summit stands the pharaoh, the living god whose divine authority maintains Ma'at, cosmic order, balance, harmony, preventing the world from sliding into chaos. In the royal palace, surrounded by gardens of sycamore figs and date palms, the king conducts the business of empire. Tribute flows from conquered territories: gold from Nubia, cedarwood from Lebanon, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, silver from the Hittites. The vizier, chief minister serving as the pharaoh's eyes and hands, oversees tax collection, justice, construction projects. He coordinates with nomarchs, the regional governors ruling Egypt's 42 provinces, ensuring grain storehouses are full and irrigation canals maintained. The temples form a state within the state. Priests of Amun-Re wield enormous influence and control vast estates. 3 times daily, at dawn, noon, and dusk, the high priest enters the inner sanctuary, breaks the clay seal, and awakens the god statue. He purifies it with sacred water, dresses it in fine linen, adorns it with jewelry, and presents offerings of food and drink. The scribes occupy a privileged position. In a land where perhaps 1 in 100 can read and write, literacy is power. Seated cross-legged in columned halls, they record everything: tax assessments, legal contracts, religious texts, royal decrees. Young boys from wealthy families attend scribal schools, memorizing hundreds of hieroglyphic signs, practicing on sherds of broken pottery called ostraca. Those who master the art of writing can ascend to heights their fathers never imagined on the eastern bank. The temple complex of Karnak takes shape across centuries, each pharaoh adding to what came before. The complex covers more than 200 acres and will continue to grow for 2,000 years. At its heart stands the Temple of Amun-Re, where the hidden god dwells. In Esplendid, an avenue of ram-headed sphinxes lines the processional way from Luxor Temple 3 kilometers south. During the annual Opit festival, Priests carry the golden bark of Amun along this avenue, accompanied by dancers, musicians, and thousands of celebrants, in a procession renewing the pharaoh's divine right to rule. The massive stone pylons forming Karnak's entrance rise like artificial cliffs from the desert floor. Painted reliefs cover their surfaces, depicting the pharaoh smiting enemies and making offerings to the gods. Flagpoles sheathed in gleaming electrum stand before the gates, their banners rippling in the breeze. Beyond the first pylon lies an open courtyard where common people gather during festivals. Past the second pylon stands the great hypostyle hall, one of the architectural marvels of the ancient world. Begun under Ramesses I and completed by Seti I and Ramesses II in the 13th century before the Common Era, the hall covers nearly an acre. 134 columns rise like a forest of stone. The 12 central columns reach 6 to 9 feet in height, their capitals carved as open papyrus flowers. Light filters through clerestory windows high in the walls, creating an atmosphere of mystery and sanctity. Every surface bears hieroglyphic inscriptions, the pharaoh making offerings, reciting hymns, performing rituals. Deeper into the temple, access becomes ever more restricted. Only the high priest and pharaoh may enter the sanctuary housing Amun's golden statue. Here, in near total darkness broken only by flickering oil lamps, the most sacred mysteries unfold. The construction employs thousands of workers. Quarrymen cut sandstone and limestone blocks along the river. Granite obelisks are hewn from rock at Aswan, then transported hundreds of kilometers by barge. Queen Hatshepsut's famous obelisk, nearly 100 feet tall and carved from a single piece of red granite, took 7 months to complete. Stonemasons dress blocks with copper chisels and wooden mallets. Sculptors carve colossal statues. Artists mix pigments from minerals and paint the reliefs in vibrant hues. The workers are not slaves but free men, paid in rations of grain, beer, and oil. During the annual flood season, when agricultural work is impossible, farmers throughout Egypt come to Thebes to labor on the pharaoh's monuments. Across the river, on the western bank where the sun sets each evening, the Valley of the Kings conceals the tombs of New Kingdom pharaohs. Beginning with Thutmose I in the early 15th century before the Common Era, Egypt's rulers abandoned pyramid construction. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom, magnificent though they were, proved impossible to protect from tomb robbers. The Valley of the Kings offers a solution. Hidden behind limestone cliffs, accessible only through a narrow defile that can be easily guarded, the valley appears as the place where the sun dies each day. Above it rises the pyramid-shaped peak of Ulkern, a natural formation echoing the sacred geometry of Old Kingdom monuments. Here, in secret, teams of skilled workers excavate tombs deep into the bedrock. Workers descend into growing tomb chambers carrying oil lamps, their flickering light barely pushing back the darkness. The air grows stale as passages extend deeper into the mountain. Copper chisels must be constantly resharpened. The debris is carried out in baskets and dumped in waste heaps. The tomb designs evolve over centuries. Early tombs feature bent-axis plans with corridors turning at right angles. Later tombs adopt straight-axis designs, plunging directly into the mountain. Some tombs extend more than 200 meters into the cliff face, descending through passages with names like the First God's Passage, the Hall of Hindering, the Chamber of the Sarcophagus. Every surface is covered with painted reliefs depicting the pharaoh's journey through the realm of the dead. Scenes from the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, and the Book of Gates guide the deceased through 12 hours of darkness. The pharaoh meets Osiris, lord of the underworld. He recites spells and passwords. He defeats the serpent Apophis, enemy of the sun god. At dawn, he is reborn with Ra, achieving eternal life. Nearby Deir el-Medina, the artisans who create these masterpieces live with their families in stone houses. This is a privileged community receiving generous rations. The workers are literate, passing their skills from father to son. On limestone flakes and broken pottery, they leave records of daily life, including the first recorded labor strike in history when, in the 29th year of Ramesses III's reign, monthly grain rations arrived late and the workers laid down their tools. The tombs are furnished with everything needed in eternity: furniture of cedar and ebony, chests of linen garments, alabaster vessels of precious oils, gaming boards, food and wine, golden jewelry and amulets, canopic jars holding preserved organs, and the stone sarcophagus protecting the mummy. Yet despite all precautions, most tombs are robbed within a generation of their sealing. Only one tomb will survive largely intact, The tomb of Tutankhamun, a minor pharaoh who died young, whose modest treasures will astonish the world more than 3,000 years after his death. The New Kingdom sees Egypt reach the zenith of its power. The military machine that expelled the Hyksos turns to expansion and conquest. Under Thutmose III, who reigns from 1479 to 1425 before the Common Era, Egypt becomes a true empire. This pharaoh campaigns relentlessly in the Levant, crossing the Euphrates River and extending Egyptian control deep into Syria. The army is a professional force. Infantry divisions wield bronze-tipped spears, axes, and swords. Archers carry composite bows capable of penetrating armor at 100 paces. The chariot corps forms the elite strike force, each chariot carrying a driver and an archer, pulled by horses bred for warfare. Military service offers social advancement for men born into humble circumstances. Soldiers who distinguish themselves receive land grants, gold, and slaves as rewards. The wealth flowing into Egypt from tribute and trade transforms Thebes into a city of unparalleled magnificence. Foreign merchants crowd the marketplaces: Nubian, Libyan, Akkadian, Hittite, Greek. They bring goods from across the known world: ebony and ivory from Punt, copper from Cyprus, tin from distant lands, incense and myrrh for temple rituals, horses from Mitanni, cedar logs from Lebanon and Thebes workshops. Craftsmen transform raw materials into objects of extraordinary beauty. Goldsmiths hammer gold thinner than paper, working it into intricate jewelry. Jewelers set turquoise, carnelian, and lapis lazuli into necklaces and pectorals. Glassmakers create vessels of brilliant blue and green. Furniture makers carve chairs and beds from imported woods, inlaying them with ivory and gold leaf. The reign of Amenhotep III, from 1390 to 1352 before the Common Era, represents the apogee of New Kingdom prosperity. The empire is secure. Tribute flows abundantly. At Thebes, he erects new temples and expands existing ones. On the West Bank, his mortuary temple, now vanished except for the two colossi of Memnon, was the largest ever built in Egypt, covering more than 35 hectares. This is the golden afternoon of the New Kingdom, when Egypt seems invincible, when Thebes is the richest city in the world. But change is coming. The religious revolution of Amenhotep IV, who renames himself Akhenaten, shakes Egypt to its foundations in the mid-14th century before the Common Era. This pharaoh attempts what no ruler had dared. He seeks to overturn the ancient religious order, replacing the multitude of gods with worship of a single deity, the Aten, the disk of the sun. He closes the temples of traditional gods, including Amun's powerful cult at Karnak. He builds a new capital in Middle Egypt, Akhenaten, and moves his court there, away from the priesthood's influence. The accompanying artistic revolution is equally dramatic. Rigid conventions give way to unprecedented realism and emotional expression. Royal family members are depicted in intimate domestic scenes. The pharaoh's features are rendered with brutal honesty. The human body is shown with exaggerated curves and elongated proportions. But this revolution proves politically catastrophic. The priesthood, deprived of power and income, becomes implacably hostile. Common people, whose religious lives revolve around traditional deities, resent temple closures. Foreign policy suffers as the pharaoh focuses inward on reform. Vassal states drift away. Egypt's enemies sense weakness. When Akhenaten dies around 1336 before the Common Era, his reforms die with him. His young son Tutankhaten soon reverses course, changing his name to Tutankhamun, signaling the restoration of old gods. The capital returns to Thebes. Temples reopen. The priests of Amun regain their power. Egypt begins erasing the heretic pharaoh from history. His name is chiseled from monuments. His temples are dismantled. His city is abandoned to the desert. The 19th dynasty, beginning in 1292 before the Common Era, sees Egypt reassert its power under rulers taking the name Rameses. The greatest, Rameses II, rules for 66 years and transforms himself into a legend. He fathers more than 100 children. He builds more temples and erects more statues than any pharaoh before or after. The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 before the Common Era, fought against the Hittite Empire in Syria, becomes the defining moment of his reign. Though the battle ends inconclusively, Rameses depicts it as a great triumph on temple walls throughout Egypt. The truth is more complex, but the propaganda serves its purpose. Eventually, Egypt and the Hittites, exhausted by decades of conflict, negotiate what may be the earliest surviving peace treaty in history. The two powers divide the Levant into spheres of influence and pledge mutual defense. Copies of the treaty, inscribed in cuneiform on clay tablets and in hieroglyphs on temple walls, survive to demonstrate that diplomacy is an ancient art. But peace comes too late to prevent the catastrophe that will end the Bronze Age. Around 1200 before the Common Era, a wave of destruction sweeps across the eastern Mediterranean. Civilizations collapse. Cities burn. Trade networks shatter. The Hittite Empire falls. Mycenaean Greece disintegrates. Coastal cities of the Levant are abandoned. Egypt, under Ramesses III, survives, barely. The pharaoh fights desperate defensive battles against invading sea peoples attempting to settle in the delta. Egypt repels the invaders, but the cost is enormous. The treasury is depleted. The empire in Asia is lost. The new kingdom enters a long, slow decline from which it will never recover. In the late 12th and 11th centuries before the Common Era, the pharaohs gradually lose control. The priests of Amun at Thebes grow so powerful they become virtually independent rulers of Upper Egypt. The royal family, governing from a new capital in the delta, controls only Lower Egypt. Tomb robbery becomes endemic as law and order break down. Around 1077 before the Common Era, the new kingdom comes to an end. The causes are many: economic exhaustion from centuries of war and monumental construction, trade network disruption from the Bronze Age collapse, political fragmentation, corruption. The age of empire is over. Egypt will never again achieve the power and glory it knew during the New Kingdom. Yet what remains transcends politics and power. The monuments of the New Kingdom endure as testaments to human ambition and creativity. The temples of Karnak and Luxor. The tombs of the Valley of the Kings. The mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir el-Bahri, rising in elegant terraces against the cliffs. The colossal statues of Abu Simbel, carved into a mountainside in Nubia, their faces gazing eternally toward the rising sun. The golden mask of Tutankhamun, bringing the face of an ancient king into immediate, human focus across the gulf of millennia. These works speak across the centuries of a civilization that believed in the possibility of eternity, that labored to create beauty that would endure forever, that sought to maintain the cosmic order through ritual and art and architecture. The scribes of the New Kingdom could not have imagined that their words, carved in stone or written on papyrus, would still be read thousands of years after their deaths. The artists who painted the tomb walls could not have known that their images would move people in ages yet unborn. Yet their works survive, bearing witness to a time when gods walked among mortals, when pharaohs commanded armies across continents, when Thebes was the greatest city in the world. The New Kingdom passed away, as all earthly kingdoms must. But it left behind something imperishable, the memory of what humanity can achieve when faith, skill, and ambition unite in the service of transcendent vision. In the end, the monuments were right. The pharaohs did achieve a kind of immortality. Not the immortality they imagined, perhaps, not the literal continuation of consciousness in an afterlife among the gods, but something just as real, eternal presence in human memory, permanent inscription in the record of civilization, enduring witness to the heights the human spirit can reach. If you enjoyed this journey through history, please like this video and subscribe to The Living Past for more historical reconstructions.